Today, I'm going to show you how I do 3D printing. I use the program Chitubox to take an STL file that's a three-dimensional file, and I put it into this program, and it shows me where it will be on my 3D printer. I can move it around, and I can add other files to it. The guy on there right now is Dan Fancy. I'm going to add another character named Kahuna. These are from a cyberpunk game that I am playing with my friends online, and I'm going to make them a little bit bigger because bigger is better, and the detail is a lot easier to see when they're a little bit larger. So now that I've got them both on what's known as the build plate, I'm going to have to support them. The support is going to be little bits of resin that hold the thing I'm printing up and together. So that you'll see when I show you how the printer works itself, it shines light into the resin and then the resin hardens. So if there's nothing for the hardened resin to hold on to, then it just falls back into the liquid resin and it'll really mess with the printer. So you have to put supports on your models, and these supports keep the model together while it's printing and keep your printer cleaner. So I like to angle my minis on there, or whatever I'm printing, so that they fit as well as possible. You might see a little bit of that white part going over the edge. That's okay because that's just the bottom of the base. But we don't want the actual model to go over the edge. And the program is really nice. It shows us if it's over the edge by making the piece red instead of blue or white. But there we go. They're nice and supported. Looking pretty good. So now I'm going to slice. What slicing is the computer program cuts these models from top to bottom into many layers, and tells the printer to print each of those layers in the resin, and when all the layers are together, it forms the whole model. That's why when you see some things that are 3D printed, they have a bunch of little lines across them. That is the individual layers that are printed. So here you can see, now that I've got it sliced, I'm going to show you, it does a top-down view. There's the top of our miniatures, and then those little dots are the supports. And so you can see how it's sliced layer by layer, kind of the same way that they do a CAT scan at the hospital, or a MRI, one of those fancy scans where they can take the image and slice it into layers. This is basically the same concept, except we're not just using it to study each layer, we're using it to tell the printer what to print. So now I'm going to save it, as you do with any program that you're working on, or file that you're working on a computer. Dan Fancy, the guy with the guitar, and Kahuna, the big guy with the guns. And now we are going to move on to the next step. When I finished saving it, I put it on this flash drive here, and this little chip is what goes into my 3D printer. As you can see, I'm going to put it in right here, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the printer itself. With that chip in, we are going to find our file. But first, let me tell you a little bit about this printer. I use water washable resin for this printer right there. Ceramic gray is the color I like. A lot of resins aren't water washable. You need to use isopropyl alcohol. This is cleaner and less fumes. See, the resin is in the tank. That's the build plate. So when I was making things on the computer, they'll actually show up upside down. The light shines up into the resin and solidifies where it's supposed to, hopefully, as long as everything's working correctly. So I make sure I got the cover back on so that there's no splash and nothing gets in the resin while it's printing. It also helps light stay out of there so that the resin doesn't harden from sunlight coming in through my window. It's always good to keep things properly ventilated, even though I am using water washable resin, which is safer. It's still fumey, it still gives me a sore throat and stuff, so I always wear a mask and I always keep a window open with a big box fan pulling all that bad air out. So now we've got our file printing, and it is going to take about 6.5 hours is what it told me. And we're going to time lapse all this printing footage because it takes a long time, and you've just got to wait and wait. And what do we do when we wait? We dance. We dance until we get shy, and then we stop our dancing. But the print continues, and continues, and continues. Every time the build plate comes up, that's another layer of resin that has been solidified by ultraviolet light and has become part of the models we're trying to print. And there are a lot of layers, usually over 1,000. Here we go. You can kind of see some of the supports in there. The orange cover makes it hard to see, but there's our finished product. And now I'm going to take the build plate off and give you guys a better look. As you can see, all of our supports were great. Now, we're going to take this off the build plate. I use a putty scraper knife and just get underneath that base. And sometimes this is really, really tricky. But luckily, because I was filming, the resin decided to take it easy on me. That popped off pretty easy. I put that in some clean water. I like filtered water for my resin minis. And then I scrape off some of that resin, rinse off the putty blade, and set it aside. And I want to use some water to clean off all the rest of this build plate, make sure there's no extra resin on there that might cause any trouble later on or get into clean resin, anything like that. Keeping everything clean is very important. Then I get my trusty resin tweezers, dunk this in the water. That gets off a lot of the excess liquid resin that might still be on there. That is a much bigger part of 3D printing than I expected it to be. The cleaning of the model almost matters more than how you set up the file. But I'm going to dunk these in water, and then I think I'm going to go with Kahuna here first, the big guy. I have a couple tools that I use to take off all the different supports, but I like to try to use my fingers first because there's the least chance of damaging the mini. Now, with these, I tried a new support setting, and I gotta say it's the best yet. Check it out. Here's a little closer view of those supports. Kind of looks like scaffolding. I think it's pretty neat. I might use it for some backgrounds and stuff. Oh man, I did it! And what you just heard was me being super stoked because these supports work so well that I literally just peeled it off like I was peeling orange skin off an orange. And that had never happened like that before. So I was really, really stoked. So once I'm done using my fingers, I use these needle nose pliers for the tougher stuff. Got them from the jewelry department at Michael's. Jewelry tools and miniature work go together pretty much hand in hand. It's something I found out. But I use these needle nose pliers to get some of the tougher things. And then for even smaller things, I might use a dental pick. But generally, once I've gotten all the supports off and it looks pretty clean, I will brush it. That's just to get all the little liquid residue that might still be in there out of the cracks or any small parts of the miniature. And then once I finished brushing it all, then I do what's called an irrigation, which is basically I squirt water all over it. But the running water helps pull the resin away and just gives it kind of a final cleaning before I set it to the side for the next step. So, still brushing that guy, but I will irrigate him soon and then move on to Dan Fancy. As we peel the supports off Dan Fancy here, a quick note about my gloves. You may notice they're a beautiful lime green. They are rubber kitchen gloves. Usually most people will use nitrile gloves or latex gloves, but kind of a shortage of those right now with everything going on. So I get these rubber gloves that are reusable. However, the resin, like I said, it is a chemical and it does eat through the gloves eventually, so I have to replace them every once in a while. But these gloves are lovely, a little too big, but other than that, they do the job fine. Now you can see I'm coming in with my dental pick here and getting into some of those smaller areas, like between his hair and his cape and collar, just because the more detail you can have and the more supports you get rid of, the better the miniature is going to look. Ultimately, you want to get rid of all supports if possible. Sometimes that's a little tricky to do without breaking a model if you have some really fine parts. And also because I'm still a novice at doing the supports and everything. But yeah, there's Dan Fancy. Now we're going to irrigate him and you can see the final product. Once we've gotten the supports removed and everything cleaned, it's time to cure our miniatures with some ultraviolet light. That's an ultraviolet light right there. I have a solar turntable. There's a solar panel. The ultraviolet light powers the turntable to spin the miniatures so they get an equal amount of this ultraviolet light that just solidifies the resin more and makes it so that it's not chemically anymore. It's easy to touch. There we go. Pretty awesome. I think the lighting even adds to it, and a spectacular little Hobbit hole cameo. Here's our finished product in ceramic gray resin, and then I gave them a prime so we could really see those details. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Got a little science for the week. I enjoyed making it, and I will see you guys later.